With the financial industry making record profits and the general sentiment being positive, I need to take a contrarian view and look at the 6 charts that show the US economic recovery is in fact a huge lie. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. I want to get into these charts, and I also want to connect that into some other details. So let's begin with this chart right here out of the St. Louis Fed. And I've shown many of these charts before, and this one happens to be commercial and industrial loans, all commercial banks. We could see how during the financial crisis, this line came downward, and it has since begun to recover. Now, just for some information for people, this average person would look at this and think, look, it's recovering. This is a recovery. Absolutely. Well, the chart is recovering, but if you look deeper into what this chart actually means, then you will know that it is not as significant as many of the others. So first point I want to note is that these are leveraged loans, and that is very important because leverage is how we got into this mess in the first place, with the banks taking extreme risk, with the individuals taking extreme risk, and we got into this position. And I also wanted to note that this isn't as if the average individual citizen is able to loan out any more money than they did before. That is not what they're doing here. In fact, many people in certain cases are renting their homes, which is the biggest ticket item for the average person. They're not buying, they're actually renting homes at the moment, and that's something to show you how this is really these institutions which are simply profiting off of the whole financial industry and everything with their conglomerates. Look at this one, which I feel is much more important: net real domestic business investment. You can see that while, yes, once again, there is a recovery taking place, it hasn't reached the level not only that it did in 2007, but also the level that it hit in the year 2000 approximately. So we are way behind on where we should be, and this is real investment here in businesses. But also you need to realize that these businesses are being propped up in many cases by the government. When we had the bailouts, General Motors and Chrysler, all these other companies that got their billions, what did they do with that? Well, in fact, they invested it overseas. They didn't bring the money back in. So a lot of this is quite fraudulent when we look at this. Pretty amazing to see. I'm going to move on to this chart here, another excellent one. There is much to look at here, but I just want to note one point from it. And you can see the yellow line where we had the financial crisis. So at that point, coming into there, we had obviously a great increase in the amount of debt. But that has increased considerably since that time. So we're looking at the same problems happening. So if you have these issues simply multiplying, well, what do you think is going to happen? It's just going to increase, and it's going to get worse. It's going to snowball, and then we're going to have a same issue that we did during the financial crisis. Many of those who will say, no, this is impossible, not going to happen, they have it under control. Look at the stock market, look at the US dollar. Nobody in 2007, at least in the mainstream, would believe that there would be a crash the level of which they did. And that was only a few years ago. Just pick up your history book and look at all the previous crashes. Every single time they said, no, it's not going to happen. If you simply subtract 2 indicators, the US dollar and the US stock markets, you will have a very different picture that is being painted in front of you. And that's what I'm here to do, is to paint that picture for you, to realize, look, our money is in this bank and our savings is there. We're hoping that our 9-to-5 jobs will be there. We need the job security. We need everything in our lives, and we take it for granted on average. But those who are informed realize that when you stop listening to the mainstream media, you can actually get to the bottom of this. And that's what really worries me, is that not enough people are really looking into this type of information. in my book, I wrote about inflation. In fact, I have a whole chapter on it, and this happens to be a chart that shows statistics from the BLS as well as Shadow Stats. Everyone on here, I'm sure, knows Shadow Stats. If not, please check them out. An excellent website, John Williams right there. But what I want to show you is that there are such fraudulent numbers that they churn out every month, every quarter, every year, and this happens to be the inflation rate. The inflation rate that they propose to us is completely fake. You can see these statistics, they say, depending on which one you're looking at, is almost near zero. In fact, in most cases, they say that there is not enough inflation. Well, in the US, look at food prices, for example, look at electricity prices, and those are two of probably the most important indicators for the inflation rates, and they say consistently, nothing to worry about, everything is just fine. But I can't believe that, and neither does John Williams from Shadow Stats. So look at these statistics here, and these are obviously a little bit outdated, but you can check them out on his website for the newest data, and you'll know that there is a several point increase just by adding in and doing the calculations the way that the US government used to do only a few decades ago. So they simply change around the way this works, and it gives you with a nice pretty number. And one of the ways, for example, that they may do this is getting rid of energy and getting rid of food prices. What a great way to keep inflation low. That's right. All you have to do is subtract all kinds of stats. And another thing that they do is they take piece by piece and they manipulate what exactly makes up this inflation rate. So for example, if steak becomes too expensive, you start eating ground beef. If ground beef, which by the way, I show you the stats on this channel all the time, is increasing and increasing and increasing, people will then choose another type of meat. Maybe they'll have hot dogs for dinner instead every night. Maybe they'll choose Spam every night. And then it goes on and on. And that's not the way you do that. That's not a calculation of inflation. It doesn't, in fact, determine the cost of living standard for somebody if you're not using the same data every single time. So it's pretty crazy the way that they're able to get away with this. Now, before I continue to rant on, I need to move on quickly. I really respect your time here. ISM manufacturing versus core durable goods. And this is very interesting here. The point that I want to note is I'm seeing 3 lines downward. And you can see these 3 crashes that are taking place, I should say 2 in the past and 1 in which we are headed for. Don't look at just the S&P 500 for your indicators. There's a lot of people who just look at 200-day moving average, for example. And that is a terrible way to base your investments on. But just look at this as one indicator. We have these lines moving in a downward direction. It happened 2 times before, and now this is the 3rd time. And look what follows afterwards, a very, very deep crash. Financial crisis obviously was very sharp, and even the one before here, the dot-com boom, was also very sharp. So this is very dangerous, and goes to show you how bad things can get very quickly. One indicator showing you that. And this right here is a similar situation where we look at from the St. Louis Fed again, value of manufacturers' new orders for consumer goods industries. And then he says on top of this, notice any similarities? And absolutely. And this goes to show you how bad the situation is. Yes, from approximately the early 90s here up until the financial crisis, it was almost a straight line upward. Then during the financial crisis, we had a major decline. But it began to climb slowly here, and we are now facing a major drop which has not been faced since the financial crisis. So this is another real indicator that is very important to look at. Now I want to move off of these and go into this here. We're looking at the AIIB, which I've covered in other videos, but look at this article that shows Israel applying to join the China-backed AIIB investment bank. They are one of more than 40 countries now that have signed up and have said, I want to take part in this. what this shows you is that the US is losing their hegemony, and this is all being done right in front of our very eyes. The AIIB is very small at this point, but it goes to show you how many countries are willing to have their alliance with China. That's really what this sets the precedent of. So very important news as far as I'm concerned out of Reuters. Let's move on to this one here. As we say, the US screws up on its approach to the AIIB. And they said this: the United States has screwed up on its way to deal with the China proposed AIIB and should not have done it this way. That's according to the former US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. And essentially what they're saying, what she's saying here, is that the US has too much power and they're abusing it. They're not letting China in on that. And of course, the US has every reason to do so in such a way, because they know that they are in for a big world of hurt should they let China surpass them in every category, and in many cases already have. I talked about all the different ways, in fact, that China is surpassing the US in my book. I want to move on to this. Here, the last thing is extremely huge as far as I'm concerned. Budget 2015, federal government to set to introduce tax on bank deposits. And of course, this is out of Australia. Labor accuses Tony Abbott of backflipping on election promise. Oh, doesn't that sound familiar? They do this every single time. All of their promises right away, they go in and just continue the agenda. We're consistently being lied to every single time. I mean, look at Obama. He said, quote, if this is the first thing I do, I'm going to get our troops, I'm going to bring them home. And they expanded the war. And look at what is happening in Iraq right now. It is worse than it has ever been. The federal government looks set to introduce a tax on bank deposits in the May budget. The idea of the bank deposit tax was raised by Labor in 2013, was criticized by Tony Abbott at the time, which is very interesting. They always do this every single time. But of course, this is just going to show you how you cannot put your trust in them. You need to put your trust in yourself and your family, and that's all we can do. Now, the reason I mention this is because the US is also going in this direction. We can see the capital controls beginning to form. We can see this taking place all around the world. In fact, in Europe, they're consistently talking about capital controls. In Greece, they're talking about it every day. In fact, look at what happened in Cyprus. Look at what happened even historically in the US. We've seen this occur before. It is happening before our very eyes. It starts with a tax, then they confiscate some of the wealth like a bail-in. They call it a levy. They call it whatever they want to. It doesn't matter. The fact remains is that our money is at risk. Our savings is at risk. And this is very, very serious information. If you found it informative, please give me a thumbs up. I truly appreciate that very much. It really keeps me going on here. All of your comments, all of your kind words, I truly appreciate that very much. I'm trying to reply to all the emails. There's consistently coming in, but I only have a whole bunch still to reply to, but much less than normal. So I'll try to get back to you within the next few days for those who have already emailed me. And last but not least, you need to be an insider. It's where I give out all my best intel, and it's for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. You just have to scroll down to the bottom. You put your email address in over here, and you will get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.